Okay, so this will be a short one, absolute value with quadratics. So let's go back to just absolute value and remember how to do it. So if we had 2x plus 1 equals 6, we would say, okay, well the absolute value makes anything in it positive, so 2x plus 1 would have to be 6, or if that 2x plus 1, the inside of the bracket, was minus 6, it would also equal 6. So 2x equals 6 minus 1, so 5 over 2 works, or minus 7 over 2 works. So we would say that our solution is either of these two numbers. When we plug those in, this one will give us a positive 6, which is 6. This will give us a negative 6 in the bracket, which is also 6. So that's how we would do that. Now we do the same thing exactly with quadratics. So we don't really change anything. It's just that each time we end up having to do a factoring or quadratic equation. And sometimes we end up with something that doesn't work or no solution. So, for example, we would say, okay, the inside of this has to equal 1. Or the inside has to equal negative 1. So now we've got two quadratic equations to solve. So in order to solve a quadratic equation, you move everything to one side. This is the difference of squares. So x equals minus 2 and x equals 2. So plugging a minus 2 in here, we'll end up with a 1. Plugging a positive 2 in here, we'll end up with a 1. So these are both two answers that will give us a 1. Over here, so a difference of squares again, but we can't actually take the square root of 2. So when we did that lecture, remember, we did root 2. And it doesn't matter which comes first, the plus or the minus. So this will give us x equals root 2 and x equals negative root 2. So if we plug root 2 in here, we get a negative 1, which is 1, absolute value, or negative. So we actually end up with 4 solutions. So the solutions are x is plus or minus 2, or x is plus or minus root 2. So 4 solutions for that. Okay, so the next one they don't always equal 1. I don't know why I have this as the second example. So we do the same thing. The inside of this has to equal 1, or the inside of that has to equal negative 1. Solve each of these separate, and you could end up with one of them not working, or one of them being a quadratic equation, one of them factoring, or even an answer that's not possible. So x squared plus 2x minus 1 equals 0. If we go to factor this, two numbers that multiply to give negative 1, 1 and 1, one of them would have to be negative. They want to add to give 2, but so we would need both of them to be plus, but that gives us not a negative 1. So this doesn't factor. We use a quadratic equation. So minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So 4 plus 4 is 8. Oh, 2a. A was 1. 2. Okay, I'll do this one on the next page. Okay, so here, square root of 8 is 4 times 2, so that's 2 root 2. The square root of 4 is 2, and there's still a 2 underneath. So minus 2 over 2 plus or minus 2 root 2 over 2. The 2's cancel. Minus 1 plus or minus root 2. So there's 2 possible answers. Now we're going to do this one on the next page. So our second part was x squared plus 2x could equal negative 1. So it's 2x plus 1 equals 0. Move it all to one side. This one will factor. Two numbers that multiply to give 1, 1 and 1, and they do add to give 2. So this gives me x is negative 1. This is the same, x is negative 1. So that's only one answer because that's x plus 1 squared equals 0, so it gives us 1. So this gives us x is negative 1. So our answers to the question, our solution, will be that x can be minus 1 plus root 2, x can be minus 1 minus root 2, that's these two answers, or x could be minus 1. So there's three possible answers for this particular question. Okay, so here's our next one. So we say x squared plus 1 is equal to 3. So we would say the inside of this, x squared plus 1 has to equal 3, or the inside, x squared plus 1 has to equal negative 3. So do one at a time. Bring the 3 over. X squared plus 1 minus 3 equals 0. This is a difference of squares, one that doesn't work nice, so it gives us root 2. So x is minus root 2, or x is positive root 2. So there's two possible answers. Here, x squared plus 1 plus 3 equals 0. So if you notice, this is a sum of squares which has no solution. If you tried to do, say, quadratic equation for it, you'd have a negative under the square root. A is 1, b is 0, c is 4. So 0 plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. So 0 plus or minus negative 16 over 2. So negative 16 doesn't work. So this side, this is not possible. And I mean, you could see that without doing any work at all, because x squared is a positive number, and then you add another number to a positive number, you're never going to get a negative 3. So this one has no solution, this part. But we did have two solutions overall, so the solution to the question is that x is plus or minus root 2. That would be all that works. Okay, so then this was a short lecture, so you could go and try these questions. And then the next part of this will be mixing absolute value with inequalities. So remember, if we have something, an absolute value and an inequality, the first step is always to rewrite it. This is greater, so this would be greater than 3, or x is less than minus 3, and then you would solve the two equations. And the other one, if we had something less than, say less than or equal, we rewrite this as being between negative 2 and 2, and then we would split this up and solve. So this would be minus 2 and x is less than 2. So that's what we're going to see, but we're going to add the quadratic part into that. So you really need to know this part from earlier first, and then the quadratic part will come, because it just makes it a little bit harder. So that will be the next lecture.